Will you pray with me? God, I ask that the meditations of our minds and the words of my lips would be holy and acceptable to you this day and be for us a word. Amen. Today's texts are crazy, in my opinion. We just had a 6-year-old say that can't be true. Today's texts are crazy. We have Elijah, we'll just pronounce it the English way. Elijah is being followed around by Elisha, who really wants to have a double dose of Elijah's spirit. And Elijah's like, yeah, man, you don't really want that. Because being a prophet is not super fun. Then we have him taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, surrounded by chariots of fire or something. Horses that are on, I don't know if they're on fire, if they're made of fire. It's wild. We also have a part in this story where the River Jordan or something is parted. There's some crazy stuff happening here. If you go back earlier in the story of Elijah, it seems almost poetic that he's taken up in a whirlwind, because earlier when he'd been out doing the work of being a prophet, and for some background, Elisha is doing the work in a time where a lot of people are worshiping Baal, who's another god, not the God of Israel, not Adonai, but another god. And a lot of people are worshiping Baal, and Elijah's like, stop, right? He's always like, you're worshiping the wrong guy. You're doing it wrong. It's not the dude. So at one point, there's prophets being killed. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And Elijah feels like he's a martyr for doing all this work. And doesn't God appreciate what he's doing? And at some point, God says in 1 Kings earlier, 19, he says, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And if you read through the whole text, anytime you're on a mountain, you should be paying attention to the Lord. I don't know if it's because you get like altitude sickness or what, but it's the place that God shows up. So he goes out to the mountain, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the rocks, in the pieces. And then the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. So it was when Elijah heard it. He finally heard that still small voice after all this crazy stuff has happened. And then at the end of his life, he's taken up in some other crazy convective storm. Today's text is wild. And if we try to glean some literal meaning from it, I think we will lose the poetry of it. One of the things that's interesting is if you look up commentaries about this text, Christians and Jews understand it very differently. For Christians, Elijah is often the perfect prophet, the one who came and showed that God was powerful and who worked and worked and worked and got people to believe that the God, Adonai, was powerful. But in Jewish commentaries, sometimes they're like, yeah, Elijah kind of made it about him and not about God, which is interesting when we compare it to some of our other texts today. But in Judaism, this text becomes an important model for a few things that happened. So I wanted to give you some context in case you're ever with your Jewish friends and this question of Elijah comes up. In this story we read today, Elisha wants a double portion of Elijah's spirit, a double mouthful. 2 servings is what it like literally means. And every time he asks, he's denied. Elijah's like, you don't know. You don't want to do this. It's too difficult. You don't want to do this. It is too difficult. You don't want to do this. It is too difficult. Elijah denies Elisha 3 times because being a follower or having the spirit of Elijah, being part of this project is too difficult. And he doesn't think Elisha wants it. So 3 different times, Elisha is denied by Elijah. And then finally, Elijah gives in and says, if you're watching and paying attention, you'll get it. Okay, for us, this probably means very little. But in Judaism, if you want to convert to Judaism, you have to be denied by the rabbi 3 times. So if you want to convert to Judaism, which there was once a curly-haired boy with brown eyes that I did think I wanted to convert for, you have to go to the rabbi and say, I want to convert. I want to have a portion of this spirit. I want to be part of this project of following the God Adonai. And they will tell you, you do not want to be a Jew. It is way too hard. And then if you come back a second time, no, I thought about it. I really do want to follow the God Adonai. They're going to say, you don't want to do this. It is way too hard. If you go a 3rd time, you don't want to do this. It is way too hard. And after you've been denied 3 times, then you can become a Jew. So you're Jewish. Some of you guys have Jewish grandkids, right? Quite a few of you. If someone wants to convert to being Jewish, they must be denied 3 times by the rabbi before they convert, because being Jewish is really, really hard. And being Elijah, being a prophet, upholding the commandments and laws of the God of Israel is really, really hard. And so that pattern actually is modeled after this text. Another thing that's common in Judaism that comes from this text, and which I think is important to understand for our story from the New Testament today, is that Elijah is the only guy in the Bible who's taken up to heaven and doesn't appear to die. So Moses and Elijah have a lot in common, right? They both split a sea. They both seem to be able to get whirlwinds to show up from God. They both act as prophets and say and point to the God of Israel, but Moses definitely died. Elijah, not so much. So in the Hebrew tradition, in the Jewish tradition that would have been around when Jesus was alive, it's a common belief that Elijah will return and announce the coming of the Messiah. Jews expect that, or in Judaism, it's common to expect that Elijah will return and announce the coming of the Messiah. So if you go to a Passover Seder, which some of your grandkids do, you always leave the door open and an extra seat at the table for Elijah, just in case he comes back hungry. So we have it as a cultural norm that you be denied 3 times before you can convert, and that you expect Elijah will show up when the Messiah comes. And then we have our transfiguration text from today. The transfiguration story of Jesus happens a little differently in every book. This one is the sparsest because Mark obviously got hand cramps or something when he was writing. He wrote the least amount of any of the gospel writers. That was a joke, just so you know. Thank you, Stan, for laughing. I don't know that he got a hand cramp. He just wrote less. And it says that Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the 3 faves, and led them up the mountain by themselves, and he's transfigured before them. He's totally transformed. His appearance changes. Then it says his clothes became dazzling white. This is not because it's a Tide commercial. It's whiter and more magnificent or whatever than anything could have gotten it naturally. I think we're supposed to read, it wasn't because he had a good laundry assistant. And then who shows up? Elijah and Moses. Elijah, who we've been waiting for to come back to tell us when the Messiah is coming. Elijah shows up. And they're trying to be hospitable. So they're like, let's make you a hut. Let's make you a dwelling so you can stay for a while. Because remember, they're supposed to have a meal ready for Elijah at the table. They're supposed to always be ready for Elijah to come back and tell them that the Messiah is coming, but they're probably up there without a picnic basket. So they offered to make him a dwelling so that he can stay for a while, because otherwise it wouldn't be very hospitable. So they offer to make him a dwelling, but before they know it, they're gone. And they're left with Jesus. And then that voice comes one more time, right? We had it at the baptism, and now we have it here. This is my son, my beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. So the reason these stories go together is because Elijah was expected to come back and tell us when the Messiah had come, and here he is standing with the Messiah, and the clouds open up and tell us. But Jesus says, don't tell anybody until after I'm dead and return. These are crazy stories. They are crazy stories, but they tell us about something about the nature of our God. They tell us something about the nature of who has come, and we're invited to trust that Jesus is God's Son, his beloved, with whom he is well pleased, and that we should listen to him. We're entering into the season of Lent. And during the season of Lent, we prepare for our own deaths. That's why we put ashes on our forehead. We look forward to the death of Jesus. Whether we know he's getting resurrected or not, that's what's coming. And during that time, we are invited into practices where we can consider the challenge and the difficulty of being a follower of Jesus. During the early church, it became a season of 40 days of preparation. Lent was the time when you would prepare to join the church, when you would prepare to be baptized. And it took 40 days because they wanted to make sure you really knew this was something hard, not something easy. In Jesus' time, like in Elijah's time, being a follower of the God of Israel was not as simple as getting in your car and driving down to the church and parking and walking in and getting a bulletin, sitting here for an hour and then leaving. It was difficult. People were persecuted. People were killed. It was difficult work, and so it was not to be taken lightly. So this Lent, it's a time for us to be invited to consider whether we really want to be followers of Jesus. Whether we really want a double mouthful of the spirit of Elijah. Whether we really want to follow the God of Israel. Because taking up our cross and bearing it is not easy. It's probably something we should be denied a few times before we really get. We're also entering into storm season. Right? It's coming. Whirlwinds. Are they? We're probably going to have some whirlwinds come from the sky. Right? And it's so cool that we get to live in a place where it corresponds with Lent. Following Jesus Christ is not easy. It is terrifying. It is terrifying if we are doing it the way he calls us to do it. These guys are up on the mountain. They're like, la, 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 we'll make you a tent. We don't know what to do. And it says they were terrified. I'm sure that people who are watching Elijah get taken up in a whirlwind and see chariots and horses of fire were terrified. I'm sure that the people who were following Moses across the Red Sea as a tornado descends and people are sucked up into the muck and mire are terrified. And I'm sure that as the disciples watched their friend get crucified on a cross by the Roman government, they were terrified. There are parts about being Christians that should scare us. There are parts about being Christians that should be hard enough we want to not do it. So this Lent, I invite us also to lean into those terrifying places. To look for God not just in the rainbows and Easter eggs and bunnies and sunshine and tulips and Easter dresses, but in the clouds and the fire and the whirlwinds from heaven. Amen.